It is time for our first panel. It's called Empowering Pennsylvanians, Emerging Stronger. And to chair our panel is Ashley Klingensmith. She's with Americans for Prosperity. Now, I met Ashley a number of years ago, and she doesn't know it, but I'm a bit of a Facebook fan. And the reason I like to follow Ashley is she always pops up somewhere different in Pennsylvania. This woman must be on the road all the time, so it's kind of like the Where's Waldo? Where's Ashley with Americans for Prosperity? Would you please welcome Ashley Klingensmith. I found her. Thank you.
Thank you. Awesome. Well, what a sweet fortune to be back with all of you. It is so good to see you all.
Can't hear you.
Oh, can't hear me? Am I good now? Good now? Good now? Okay. It is such a fortune to be back with all of you. We are so grateful to be here. Our table is out in the hall, Americans for Prosperity. Best way to think about us is we're the nation's largest grassroots, nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that promotes scaling down the size and scope of government. And so every day I say we are under that dome or in communities scaling your voice to make sure that the least organized and most underrepresented special interests of them all, the hardworking taxpayer, gets a voice and gets representation under the dome. So I'm so excited today to talk a little bit about some problems and some solutions. And so from state capitol rotundas really across the nation to the heart of DC, we have seen government's power over us grow exponentially during COVID. The draconian measures taken here by our chief executive right across the river have caused such immeasurable harm to Pennsylvanians, from our students to our workers to our seniors, that will far outlast whatever strain du jour of COVID exists. So in response, though, we have seen moms, we have seen caregivers, we've seen Americans from all walks of life rise up and demand something different, demanding a government that really is putting us first instead of the political class. And there was really no better recent example of this than what voters did in the Commonwealth of Virginia, where they rejected the tired ideas of Terry McAuliffe and endorsed the idea of a more limited government through a Youngkin administration. So here in PA, we really can't accept going back to the way things were pre-COVID from a policy perspective. We really need a completely redefined modus operandi. And so I want to talk about a couple of statistics, and then we're going to begin our discussion. But we really do remain among the first of the worsts on so many different lists. Wallet Hub, a personal finance website, includes PA in their top 5 states with the highest overall net tax burden. When it comes to regulations, the database State Reg Data takes a look at state administrative codes and quantifies regulatory restrictions. And once again, the burden that Pennsylvania places on her citizenry includes a number of obligations that rank us in the top 10 most regulated states in the nation. And last, according to North American Moving Services 2020 Outbound Migration Report, we are amongst the top outbound migration states. So it's evident the status quo is just not working. And the fiscal and regulatory issues that make it so really fall under what AFP calls our priority initiative of economic progress. And so what we want to do is turn some of those aforesaid ills into gains, and we've got to empower Pennsylvanians to be able to do that. So Harrisburg is clearly holding us back by growing its influence, and there are certain and immediate ways that we can turn the tide. So going to give you some actionable steps to help us try and do that at the conclusion of our time together. but I want to talk and scale the voice of a couple fantastic people that we have today, and really talk through some of what is really going on the ground, what's going on under the dome, and then what's happening in another state that is so wonderful that Pennsylvania can emulate and try to do the same. So first we're going to start with Mr. Tony Martin. He serves as president of Martin's famous pastry shop. Many of you might have tried their famous potato rolls. He's the grandson of the founders and has been a lifelong Pennsylvania resident. He is a graduate of Ohio State University. He received a bachelor's in aeronautics and aerospace science. He has served as VP of Business Information Systems and VP of Supply Chain Logistics. Working in a variety of departments within the business positioned him to really lead with integrity and ensure the perpetuation of the company for generations into the future. But he's not just a bread guy. He is also, as you may have guessed from his degree, a private pilot and frequents the skies in that capacity. So resides in Chambersburg with his family, and so we're so grateful to have you here. You generously hosted at your place of business a hearing about regulatory reform. And I was there, I heard your testimony about just moving an entrance to your facility. And so I wanted you to share a little bit about that story. It's an incredible example of the scope of influence that state agencies and bureaucrats have over us. And then end with a positive note that you just recently shared. So the floor is yours.
All right, I'd be happy to do that. Again, my name is Tony Martin. I am president of Martin's Pastry, and we are a third-generation company based in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. And we've had the privilege to be a member of the Pennsylvania business community for a long time. I will say it does matter what state you're in, and I'll give you some anecdotal information. But several years ago, if you've owned your own property and you're trying to develop, you've all experienced this, and those who haven't, it's tough. But we wanted to build a small pole building first. It was a 12,000 square foot building, and a little over a year later, and $80,000 in fees and ways of just trying to get back and forth to government to try to get our permits aligned, we were able to finally build the building. It's a fairly small building. The next thing we wanted to do was build an office. For Chambersburg, we needed to revitalize it and make it more appealing. We're in the country, so it's a little hard to get some people to move to the country. So we did that. And the other thing we wanted to do at the same time was move our entrance to align with our neighbor. And it was for safety reasons we wanted to do that. We were advised to not include that in the permitting process because it would take too long. That's a shame. So we listened to that. So in 2016, we started the process of moving that building, or moving the entrance. And in the process of doing so, it would go back and forth to the engineers and lots of questions to and from. Well, PennDOT ultimately denied our request. Like, that's our building. We wanted to move the entrance. We thought that was kind of silly. I begrudgingly don't like to do it, but I called local politicians because I wanted to find out what are our options here? What can we do? And our local senator at the time was willing to take us in and discuss it. He, unbeknownst to us, called PennDOT ahead of us and said, hey, they have a meeting scheduled for you in Harrisburg. Why don't you come up and see us? Lo and behold, we sat down with PennDOT, and magically, we were allowed to continue. Again, it's a shame. So we finally got the permission to at least apply for the permit and continue the process. 4 years later, we got through the engineering of that event. The fees exceeded what the cost was to actually move the road. Those are the kind of things that we have to fix. And engineering is important. We want to make sure that we're a good citizen. We want to make sure we have good runoff. That's not the issue. The issue is the process needs to be fixed. And what I mean by the process, so engineers in Harrisburg have 20-some days to reply to every request. And that's fine. So you send them, your permit, they send you the questions back, you reply to those questions. 24 days later, you get a response. Not to what the questions were originally, but now you have new questions. It's a process that, again, it's just a way of delay, and it causes your companies in Pennsylvania to really have a burden to get through that process. Finally, in 2021, we opened the new road, and we're using it. We have a center lane that we paid for to allow for our traffic to turn left in and not get hit. It is a state road, so we understand there has to be rules there, but the process, again, it needs to be amended. The anecdotal part of here recently is we've been blessed through COVID, believe it or not. People weren't eating in restaurants, they want to eat in grocery stores, so there's more demand at the grocery stores. So that enabled us and needed for us to expand again, and we give credit to where credit's due. We called our Area Development Corporation, and they aligned us with Harrisburg and the Governor's Action Committee, and we were able to walk through this time differently than the first time. We were able to make a very complex request for the NPDES and all the different permits that we need to make this expansion, and we were able to turn it around in 2 months. Wow. Our contractor really said that we wouldn't have anything probably until early spring. Wow. So when government gets behind it and is for it, it works. That shouldn't be just the exception. That should be the rule, in my opinion. The anecdotal side of business, when I say Pennsylvania government is tough to work with, you compare that to the other states that you're competing with. And we have another facility in Georgia. And I will say they roll the red carpet out to bring business in. And they make it very easy. Pennsylvania can learn from its neighbors and its Colorado and other places. So I appreciate everybody trying to think through this process and improve it, but we just try to do our part, and we just want to do business.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yes. It's my pleasure to introduce our next panelist, Senator Kristin Phillips-Hill. She hails from York Township. She's halfway through her first term in the Senate, representing the 28th Senatorial District. Previously served a couple of terms in the State House, so her perspective is great because it spans both chambers. She has both a bachelor's and master's from Rutgers. She is really known as being a fiscal hawk, being known under the dome as a strong supporter of making tax dollars more transparent and more accountable to the people that pay the bills, and that is you and me. As a former small business owner who knows government efficiency is really paramount, she's led on both tax and regulatory reforms. Some members over across the river like to talk about, managing taxpayer dollars seriously, but talk is cheap, and we really should look at their records and their action. She does not participate in the state's pension program or health insurance program, and she commutes to and from Harrisburg using her own vehicle without accepting mileage reimbursement. So thank you for that on behalf of all of us. But Senator, you have led early on when it comes to regulatory reform. Can you just chat a little bit about what inspired you to take the lead on the issue? And can you touch a bit on your legislation, Senate Bill 32? It's called the Comprehensive Regulatory Reform for Pennsylvania Act, that would address the very issues Mr. Martin just discussed. So thanks so much for being here.
Well, thank you, Ashley. Can everyone hear me? There we go. Move that up a little. Thank you, Ashley. And what a perfect segue, having heard from Tony Martin. And I have to tell you, we have enjoyed Martin's cinnamon raisin bread as French toast on many, many mornings. So I highly recommend it. But everything that he said is really the genesis of my interest in trying to reform Pennsylvania's regulatory system. It started with a lunch with a local businesswoman who'd come back from Kansas and said, I was meeting with companies that I do business with, and they told me about this law that just got passed where the governor goes through and does this analysis of regulations, and they created an independent office of the repealer so they could begin to work through their regulatory system and get rid of what doesn't work, what is overly burdensome, what is duplicative. And I thought, this is amazing. And then as I did my work as a legislator, whether I was talking to a nonprofit like the YMCA who said, our lifeguards have to meet higher standards than the average lifeguard that is a lifeguard at a local pool, and it's making it difficult for us to find lifeguards to come and work at the YMCA. It is our local municipalities who are dealing with these incredible stormwater management requirements. It is systems of education. It is businesses large and small, and we have to do something about this, because here's the reality. Over-regulation is really just another form of taxation, because as Tony very articulately shared with you how much money and how much time it took to get through the regulatory process to do something that was so very common sense. So we crafted legislation. It was an entire package, and we gave it to them any way they want. So here's what happens in Harrisburg. They'll tell you, you know, these are really good ideas, but if they were just all together in one big bill, we could get it done. Or they'll say, well, you know, this is just too much, so maybe we should separate it into separate bills. So we gave it to them any way they would want it. We gave them Senate Bill 32, which is a massive comprehensive regulatory reform bill, and then we gave them individual bills that we spread out amongst members from all parts of the state to try and get to these problems. So the comprehensive legislation has that independent office of the repealer component. It is a systemic look at our state's regulations. Now think about this. Just this week, we voted to continue to waive regulations on healthcare. Why? Because during COVID, we learned that a lot of these regulations were getting in the way of taking care of the people of Pennsylvania. My goodness, wouldn't that be a perfect place to start? If we didn't need those regulations through the last 2 years of COVID, we probably don't need those regulations going forward in the future. And then we looked at things like Mr. Martin explained. That regulatory process. He probably didn't know where any of those permits were in the process, right? Well, we live in a day and age where you can order something from Amazon and you can track it from your order to delivery. You can order food from Uber Eats, and you can track exactly where your food delivery is until it winds up on your front porch. We should be able to do that in government, and that would help our businesses be more effective and get these projects done in a more timely fashion. The other thing that we want to look at is the gotcha moment, right? We pass these regulations into law. Once we clean up the code, they're important, right? And it's like homework. A teacher doesn't give homework to a student to say, gotcha, you didn't do it. The teacher gives homework because an important concept was taught in the class and they want to reinforce that. These regulations that we keep will be important, right? So we want to help our businesses comply with that. So we would have a regulatory compliance officer, someone that a business, a nonprofit, a small government could reach out to and say, how do we do this? Help us, we're struggling. And I think that type of collaboration, that type of transparency, resetting the deck, and then looking at moving forward, making sure that regulations are not just adopted willy-nilly and clog the code again, but are really thoughtful and have the input of the duly elected representatives of the people, the General Assembly, especially when there's going to be a significant financial impact to the Commonwealth or to any of its businesses. And we believe that that's the best way we can forge a path forward of economic prosperity and keeping the economy here in Pennsylvania really vital. So that's where we're at.
Well, we're so grateful for your leadership, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what folks can do to help advance that legislation. But next up, I'm going to introduce, and not certainly last but not least, my kind colleague who hails from the Centennial State. He drove in from Philly last night when his plane was canceled, so thank you. But he serves as the State Director of Colorado for Americans for Prosperity. He joined us in 2017. He is engaged since that time in several legislative efforts and ballot measures to protect taxpayers and increase taxpayer protections. He spent 6 years working in the Colorado Senate and served as Chief of Staff for 2 Senate presidents. So Jesse, I asked you to come to share some of the benefits of the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, or TABOR. This is a restraint on government that Coloradans approved now quite a while ago that really has allowed them to reap some extraordinary gains, both indirectly and directly. Here in PA, we have the chance this session to finally put guardrails on Harrisburg spending, on state spending, and that is through a constitutional amendment called the Taxpayer Protection Act. I would say it's probably AFP's keystone priority this session. It's been around now, I am sad to say, for a decade. And so we want to see this actually advance so that we can get this to the voters for a vote as soon as possible. And so we know that last May 18th, we saw some ballot measures, some constitutional amendments on our ballot, and we passed them, which limited the duration of disaster declarations and kind of addressed executive overreach by governors. And so I think Pennsylvanians want the opportunity to be able to directly weigh in at the polls on the ballot. So this here in Pennsylvania would be enabled through House Bill 71 and Senate Bill 286. All it would do is say, hey, the budget spending in Harrisburg has got to be tied to the rate of inflation, the rate of population growth, and if you want to be able to spend over that, you have to take a vote on it. So it's a very common sense approach. It has bipartisan support. We actually now, I think, are at 55 co-sponsors on House Bill 71, and so there is absolutely no reason that it should not run. So, Jesse, I want you to talk about Tabor in Colorado, about how it came to be, about the benefits to Coloradans, and a little bit about that refund you all get at the end of the year.
Absolutely, and it's just nice to be in a state where I can openly admit I'm a Steelers fan. I don't get that. I don't get a warm welcome in Colorado with that. So, thank you. Next time, let's do this in Pittsburgh, but we'll talk later. So yeah, in Colorado, we have the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, or as we call it, Tabor. And what it says is, if you want to raise taxes or you want to increase debt, it has to go to a vote of the people. People must approve. It says that state spending can grow with population plus inflation, but more importantly, if state receives more money above our state spending cap, it gets returned to the taxpayers. And what the state spending cap does, why I like it so much, is we don't have the volatile cuts that other states have with their dramatic peaks and their low valleys. We have a very predictable budget. In Colorado, when they say our budget was cut, that means they had a reduced increase. So a reduction in their increase is a cut. You know, what a world. They wanted 40, they got 30. So they say that's a 10 million cut. You say, well, actually it's a $30 million increase. That's not too bad. So one of the things that it does is it creates an equal footing between the citizens and the government. So if they want to make some new spending package or they want to increase debt for something, it has to be mutually beneficial for the people of Colorado because they ultimately are the ones who are paying for it. And this is why that there's those in the Capitol and those special interest group that absolutely hate it because ultimately the citizens are the ultimate deciders. What's easier to lobby? 33 House members, 18 in the state Senate, and 1 governor, or 1 to 2 million Coloradans. So, yeah, one's a little more effective than the other. So, but the important thing is that over 70% of Coloradans support this.
Wow.
And that means both parties, independents. The only people who hate it are ultra-wealthy liberals. They absolutely despise it for whatever reason. And every year, I get somebody who says, I'm gonna go to the ballot and I'm gonna expose Tabor for what it is. And I'm like, go for it, easy layup. Like we can have that conversation all day. And they won't, because they know that Coloradans definitely support it. This is why they tried to sue to get rid of it. So elected officials, special interest groups tried to sue to repeal it. Their argument, this attacks the very core of a Republican form of government. Even our courts laughed them out and said no. We don't have great courts, just for the record. But a couple things to keep in mind. So in Colorado, we've had a huge see, we have the opposite problem. People keep moving here constantly. Like we have huge population growth. It comes from California, New York, and Illinois are the primary drivers of this. And what's amazing is these people move to our state and they might vote for progressive Democrats and might consider themselves very left-leaning. They love Tabor. Let me tell you why. So let's take Illinois, for example. The the legislature will meet, let's say, before a holiday weekend, and then say, they'll pass the tax increase, say on, July 3rd. And they'll be like, gosh, nobody was upset when we talked about this. Well, yeah, because everybody was busy doing something else. In Colorado, the legislature can pass it if they want to. That's going to the ballot in November. And what happens is we all get a blue book. It's a book that's blue, and it has the pros and the cons. We all get to read it. And the beautiful thing about Tabor, it says, shall taxes be increased is the first thing you see. Not all fluffy language about all the things they want to do with the money, but it sends you the price tag up front. And then the voters of Colorado get to make their decision. And it's something that I believe has been beneficial. It promotes transparency, accountability, and it forces the government to put together a package that's not just going to benefit them or a select few, but benefit all the people of Colorado, and then they get to make their case. So my thing is look, if we can pass this, and more importantly, protect it in the state of Colorado, there's absolutely no reason you can't do it in Pennsylvania. Let me tell you that.
Yes. I'm so sorry if I missed this. Can you just repeat what is roundabout the average refund?
Sure. So we've, thanks to Tabor, we've had a really great recovery in Colorado. We don't, we didn't get to do increased spending, or we didn't have to do draconian cuts, because once again, we have a very stable baseline that we know we're going to operate from. So over the next 3 years, the taxpayers of Colorado are going to get back $4 billion. That's with a B. So the first year is $95 on average. Next year, $350.
Wow.
Year after that is like $400. I mean, that is real money to the average person. And it is their tax dollars that the government collected too much of. So, I mean, can you imagine the kind of impact that would have on a working family who's struggling to make ends meet to get an extra $400 of their money back?
Yeah.
That's life-changing.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I think there is great news. We have some real immediate reforms we can advance. At AFP, we're not about pumping out white papers or research. We're about boots on the ground and action. And so what I'm asking all of you to do at some point today is just visit protectpataxpayers.com. Sign that letter. It'll take under 60 seconds, and it is going to go to the inbox of both your state house and state senator member, and we are asking them to simply run House Bill 71 and Senate Bill 286, Taxpayer Protection Act. And on that site, you'll also see then a link to be able to sign another letter about regulatory reform generally. And so we really believe that these two pieces of legislation are a starting point to get Pennsylvania moving in a different direction. And we've sort of reached the point of no return when it comes to nibbling around the edges. I would contend we need big, seismic, transformative bills. That's what AFP key votes. And so you can also visit pataxpayerscorecard.com. The first half of this 2021-2022 legislative session, we sent key vote alerts for 31 bills. So we put members on notice a couple hours before their votes that we were going to score that piece of legislation. And so amongst 31 bills, we have about 8,000 votes between committee votes and procedural votes and amendments. So please check that resource out. It's there to be utilized by campaigns, by grassroots, for volunteers, for accountability, both positive and negative. And so we cannot do what we do without your help, so please go out, visit our table right in the main hall. We have a full-time grassroots infrastructure of 9 to 11 staff at any given time, and so it is just such a pleasure to be here with you. I hope you enjoy the conference, and I just want to thank Mr. Martin, Senator Phillips-Hill, my sweet colleague Jesse for coming to PLC today, and we just look forward to seeing these things advance through the process and making a real difference in each of our lives. So thank you all so much. Awesome, thank you.